Hey, thanks for joining me with the Q&A with Jay. I'd like to thank everybody that asked questions. Didn't get a whole lot of response on YouTube, but that's kind of to be expected. We're new and still not out there yet, but I'm sure that'll change in the future. But we did have a couple of suggestions on YouTube, so we're going to go ahead and address them. My son's going to read the questions for me, and I'm just going to answer. It's easier than holding up a piece of paper and doing all that fun stuff. He's going to read off the suggestions from YouTube, and I also cross-posted this over to the DIY Teardrop Campers community on Facebook, and that's where I got a good majority of these questions. So without further ado, here's Rob with the first suggestion from YouTube.
Chaotic Transport said he'd like to see a full build series on a 5x12 square back.
5x12 square back. Hey, I'm all for that. The thought of building a square drop kind of intrigues me. It's a little outside of my norm, as I'm more of the traditional kind of guy, but I'm open to it all, so maybe we can do that sometime. What's the next one, Rob?
Ernest Ladd, I would love to see some content on general safety. Too few folks take safety as serious as they should.
I would happen to agree with you there. I definitely plan to do a whole video on hooking up a trailer and a trailer safety, and also doing one on teardrop safety all around, like extinguishers, locations, and stuff like that. So stay tuned. We're going to get to that. But those were the two really good ones, good suggestions off of YouTube. So now we're going to switch it over to the DIY Teardrop Campers community's questions, and we're going to answer those.
The first one comes from Michelle Fuller. She asks, teardrop made for handicap?
To my knowledge, there is no teardrop made for handicap, but that's the glory of building your own, because you can definitely make it whatever you want. An issue with that is going to be door size. They call them pack and play doors, and they're really wide. They're like I think they're almost 4 foot wide and 4 foot tall. So that would be ideal for like a 5 foot tall camper, which you would probably need anyway because of handicap restrictions. Another thing that would pop up in my head would be about the grab bars and stuff like that. And that's a suggestion from another member, I think Daniel Wick, in the comments. Daniel, you got tons of great questions, man. I almost have to do a whole episode on the questions that you have, but I'm going to answer a few of them. As far as the grab bars, if it were me and I had to have grab bars, inside or out, I would install them with through-the-wall bolts and T-nuts. Same way I do my fenders when I have to bolt them to the wall. So, you're getting the full strength of the whole wall, really, if you do it that way, not just a little surface area. And I know they have to be strong, so if I had to do a grab bar on a teardrop, that's how I would do it. I go through the wall with T-nuts on the back, and that would make it flush on the inside. You could even countersink it and cover it up.
The next question comes from Katie Martin. What's the number one tool you recommend knowing really well to do your first build?
Tool to know really well, I would say probably how to read a tape measure for one. And as ridiculous as that sounds, it's very true. You got to learn to read a tape measure in the increments in between, not just the half, the quarter, or the 3/4 inch mark. You got to know the 8ths, the 16ths, so that's kind of important. Safety wise, I would say learning how to use a router before you even try to use a router would be a good idea. Practice, because the router can be a very, very dangerous tool. That bit spins real high RPM. So I think if you can learn to read a tape measure and you can learn to safely use a router, your build's going to go so much smoother.
Next question comes from Shelly McCann. Explain the weight importance in a teardrop build. Is it more in the front or rear?
That's kind of a loaded question. Almost anybody you ask might have a different answer. For me, myself, I would rather it be a little tongue heavy than galley heavy. The reason being is if it's heavy in the back, you get more sway. If it's heavier in the front, you get less sway. So if you're going to be heavy now, you need to do that in the front on the tongue. Now keep in mind, you don't want to go crazy and put too much weight on the tongue either. There's definitely a delicate balance. But if it's got to be heavy anywhere or have more weight anywhere, I would probably want it toward the front of the trailer. There's a lot of variables to that, including, and that's not limited to your tow vehicle. There's just a ton of different things that kind of go into planning the way your trailer is balanced and your axle location, stuff like that. If you're stuck with an axle location in one spot, you're kind of stuck. So you kind of got to do your research. You can always ask the group, but that's my take on that situation.
Next question comes from William Fenner Jr. On a sandwich wall, are the core cutouts filled with insulation really increasing the R value? Or is it more for lightening the wall?
I think it's a little of both. You're definitely going to lighten the wall because if you take chunks of 3/4 inch plywood or whatever you're using, or even if you're building a stick built wall, and you're skinning on each side, I think, if you're using the plywood, you're taking that plywood out, and the insulation you're putting in that void is, I think it does both. Okay, 3/4 inch plywood. If you just use plywood walls, there's very little insulation value in plywood. But so I myself personally just do the 3/4 inch walls. I've never done a sandwich wall. Not to say, well, yes, I did. Built a 6.5 by 10 square back, no galley. And I used a landscape trailer and I built the rails from the landscape trailer into the walls. So that made the walls almost about 2 inches thick. So I filled the voids with insulation. So it's not your conventional way, not the way most people do it. So it's kind of different than what you're asking me.
The next question comes from Ryan Rude. What is the most common mistake made when building a teardrop? Any area of the building you really dislike?
The most common mistake I think people make are not extending the hurricane hinge over the wall. They're cutting the hurricane hinge flush with the wall, which causes all kinds of water issues. Part of the builds I hate is the finishing. I cannot stand the paint polyurethane, anything like that. So I tend to drag my feet a little bit, and when it's cold and you use the heaters that I use, it's kind of dangerous. So I try not to polyurethane when it's cold, or paint, paint's different, but polyurethane and stuff like that I try not to do when it's cold, and I hate to do it, to be honest with you. I'm okay at it. I'm still learning finishes, but that's what I hate about the build more than anything else.
Justin May, what's your favorite storage hack?
I didn't really have a storage hack until I built the last camper that I built with that basement. That basement is a good storage hack. If it were my camper, I would have had some inside access too, but the lady I built it for didn't want the inside access, and that's fine. So that one was all outdoor access. That really is a game changer to have all that storage underneath. If that basement was, I think it was 10 or 11 inches tall, and the whole length of the cab, I didn't continue it into the galley because that just shortens your cab. It limits what you can do. So I stopped it at the back bulkhead wall, and it had a good amount of storage in it. And I think I'm going to do that one again.
Next question comes from Daniel Wick. Purchase a trailer versus building one?
Purchase or build? I would say if you can afford it, to have one built for you. As opposed to buying one. The ones that you buy aren't really designed for what you're doing with it. That doesn't mean that they won't do what you're doing with it, because they will. I've built a few on landscape trailers. My personal favorite, and there's going to be another, I'll touch a little bit more on this in another question, because somebody else asked another question, and it'll kind of relate to this, but is pop-up trailer. You find an old pop-up camper, and buying that, you can usually get them for a couple $100. I mean, they're garbage to use as a pop-up anymore, but all you're really after is a frame anyway, and maybe some other little trinkets here and there. Again, I'll get into that a little bit more with another question that's going to be asked. But I personally like the pop-up trailers, the pop-up camper frames.
Matthew Meyer, building doors versus buying doors.
Building versus buying doors. I think another member asked the same question too. I guess that's on you. If you're a traditionalist and you want something that looks traditional, in my opinion, for the 100% traditional look, build your door. Make your own. Now, if you want something that you can just bolt in, don't have to think about much, buy a door. Okay, there's options for cutting down doors, full-size RV doors too. That I've done that a couple of times myself, more than a couple, I think 8 times. And then, so that's 16 doors I think I've cut down.
Bruce Gardner asks, cheap Harbor Freight trailer or a couple $100 more for a well-built trailer?
A couple $100 more for a well-built trailer, hands down. Now that being said, I have used the Harbor Freight trailers, and you can use them, but know that if you do use them, you assume certain risks. Certain things should be done. And if I ever used a Harbor Freight trailer again, the first thing that would go is the axle, gone. And probably the tongue. I probably have the whole tongue redone because I just don't like them. And if you're going to go that far, you might as well just spend the extra couple $100 and buy one that's already ready for the build. So there's the answer to that question. If you have a choice, you find a better trailer for a couple of $100 more, spend a couple $100.
Jim Gammon, how do you disassemble, cut, and rebuild an RV door to fit a teardrop?
I'm glad you asked, and I do actually have 2 videos already on YouTube for that exact thing. So there's 2 videos on YouTube. You can go to my channel and you'll find them there, and I'm pretty detailed on how it's done. Like I said, I think I've cut 16 doors down. It might be more, I might be off on that so far, and it's worked out pretty well.
Next question comes from Tom Marie. The one on here all the time, tips and tricks for the famous hurricane hinge.
Tips and tricks for the famous hurricane hinge. As much as I'd love to answer that question for you, that's a whole video by itself. There's, in my opinion, there's so many different tips and tricks for the hurricane hinge that I think it deserves its own episode. So make sure you subscribe, because I will be going over that here really soon, because I do have a build starting shortly.
Patrick Preston, how to join 2 pieces of plywood to make it longer or taller?
There's lots of ways you can do it. You can cut a lap joint, which you're taking 50% of the material off of one, and opposite 50% of material off the other on the opposite side, so they kind of go like this and lock in. Glue the crap out of it. You can use biscuits. You can use the Craig jig. I've had to do this a couple of times, and what I do is I'll Craig jig them together with the Craig jig, the pocket hole jig, and then I try to plan that seam to be inside a cabinet in the galley. So I try to do it in the back if I can, or at the bottom if I got to go taller. The reason being is you can hide it if it's inside a cabinet. You can build a little false wall, and then you can reinforce the back with plywood or whatever you want, really. glue and screw it really good so it never comes loose.
Second part to Patrick Preston's question is walls attached to the top or the side, which is best?
Walls attached to the top or the side, which is best? I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, but if you're asking how to attach the walls, myself personally, I don't attach them to the frame. I build a little lip, the thickness of the wall on the floor to where the floor rests on that lip. And then I screw through the lip into the 2x4 that's on the flat. So that gives you 3.5 inches of screw that you can use, plus your 3/4 inch plywood. So I go with lots of glue through the wall into that 2x4, and that's how I attach the walls at the bottom. At the top, for the roof spars, I drill through the wall into the roof spar, but that's not good enough in my opinion because you're screwing into end grain. And end grain, when you screw into end grain, it's like imagine you had a bunch of toothpicks and they're all bunched together. Okay, and they're all bunched together, and you take a screw and you screw into that. You just separate them. It doesn't get a real good strong bite. So I also, I do that through both sides, but I also add 2 pocket holes on each spar on each side. So 4 pocket holes plus 2 through the wall to keep everything where it's going. So that way you're not just relying on screws into the end grain.
Mike John, the cheapest teardrop you can make and how?
Cheapest teardrop you can make and how? I just did one. In fact, I took it to the gathering in Quantamon Falls here in Paradise, Michigan, and some of you got to see it. And it was a 4x8 square back built on a pop-up trailer frame. I used the lights from the pop-up. I used the fantastic fan from the pop-up. It was only 12 volt, so there was no converter. I had 2 batteries in it. It's the black one, the black teardrop or the black square back that I built. And I got away. Now I have an advantage that most don't, and that's a RV surplus store really close to me, or close enough to drive. I won't say really close because I still drive 3 hours to get there. But their skin, I use Phylon. Phylon's cheap there, so I think I spent maybe $1,200 on that whole build. And I even replaced the axle, bought new tires, new rims, the whole, I did it right, but it was under $1,200. Now that's no galley, it's just 12 volt only, 1 door, 2 windows, with a bank of cabinets in the back, 2 batteries, 12 volt lighting. That's all it had. But that was a cheap build. And that's the advantage of using a pop-up, is you can use anything in that pop-up that still works. You can use the lights, you can use the converter. If you can figure out a way to work the furnace in safely, you can use the furnace. You can use the refrigerator. Again, venting is an issue with that, so do your homework. But all this stuff you can use that'll save you huge money throughout your build if you can secure a pop-up camper and are willing to put the effort into tearing it down to the frame and starting over, but using what you have in there in your build, and you're going to get away cheaper than most could ever dream. So that's the way I would do it.
Danny Leonard, polyester fiberglass versus Phylon PMF versus aluminum.
Very good question. Unfortunately, I've only done Phylon, so I can't really answer to PMF. I can't really answer to aluminum yet. I'm going to do an aluminum trailer here soon. And I've never done any fiberglass resin or anything like that. So unfortunately, I can't answer that. As far as Phylon goes, I can answer that, and that stuff is great. In my opinion, of course. It's easy to work with. The only pain with Phylon is that it's fiberglass. So if you're using or cutting it, you have to cover your skin. You will itch for days. Trust me, I know. And always, make sure you use a respirator. You do not want fiberglass in your lungs. You should do that anyways. You should be wearing a dust mask when you're cutting wood. Safety is always top. So no matter what you use, make sure it's safe. Unfortunately, I wish I could answer that question, and maybe I will be able to in the future. But for now, I can only speak to Phylon.
James Poplet, how to put a window in the front of your teardrop?
Another good one. I haven't done that. I've heard horror stories about windows leaking. Even the ones that are supposedly made for that, the Stargazer. And I've also heard people say they've had no problem with it. To me, if you're going to install a window, it needs to be on a flat surface. And that window can't be flat. Windows aren't designed to have water puddled in them. Okay, so if it's raining, the water's puddling in that window. It's not designed for that, so it's a good chance you're going to get a leak. Maybe you won't. Again, I can't speak to it because I haven't done it, but I'm just going off of what I've read and the experiences that I've heard of from people. And as far as, I think that has something to do with car windshield. They sell windows for that purpose. They're called Stargazer windows. Now apparently there's a new style of the Stargazer window that doesn't have the frame. I have yet to see one or know of anybody that's used one. So that's probably going to be something we'll take on here in the future. So maybe we'll all learn that one together. Last question.
Last question comes from Jesse Lee. Due to a budget and restriction considerations, I want to build the cabin first and get it registered as a cargo trailer, then build out the interior trailer. How can I or should I future-proof for electrical without being obvious or having to add the outside of the wall later?
Okay, well, what I would do if I had to build a cargo trailer, get it registered because of whatever reason, get it registered. I'm assuming you're going to have an inspection too if you're asking about electrical and trying to keep it not as obvious. What I would do is I'd put up the walls, I would skin the roof, get it all to that point, skin the roof to where it's watertight on the outside, but I would leave the spars on the inside, the crossbars, naked. Then after your inspection, after you get it registered or whatever, I would bring it home and then add your electrical in your ceiling, not your wall. Or if you're doing a foamy or something, you could probably put it in the wall by taking a router and just routing out a small channel and sinking it into the wall. But I haven't built a foamy and I don't know if that would mess with the structural integrity of the camper itself. But that's what I would do. I put up the walls, I get a watertight shell. So I put up the walls, I run the spars, I'd skin the outside to where it's watertight, I'd take it, get it registered, whatever. Then when I get home, you should be able to see all your spars. So plan it out then. Even if you got to pop through for a fan or pop through the sides for a light, it's still possible because it's still all open. And then run your wires and throw up your interior skin and call it a day. That's what I would do. I hope I'm answering that right because that's what I take. That's what I think you're trying to do. So that was the last question. I'd like to thank you for joining us for the Q&A with Jay. We got some exciting things coming up, and we plan to release new content every weekend. So chances are every Sunday we're going to have a new video. I have a build or two coming up soon. So we're going to do a complete build video with this new equipment that we have. And I'm going to try to do it to where like you're standing there with me and I'm teaching you. I'm going to try. That's not always easy to do because it takes a lot more time to do it that way, but I'm willing to put in a little extra effort to help you guys out. So thanks again. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Also, feel free to shoot a thumbs down if that's what you want to do. We're always open to constructive criticism. We try to avoid drama, so if you have a point to make it. Just try to stay polite. Just easier on everybody. There's enough evil in the world today, I think. everybody could use a little bit of positivity. Once again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.